Number 1. Trust. I first got on the internet in the late 1990s. I was pretty naive at the time, as I assume many of us were. I was so overwhelmed by the amount of people that I met and the supposed friends that I made. I was 16 years old, and I was really at odds with my parents at the time. And that was when I began talking to a girl who lived in California. Though we never had any sort of romantic talking, we became what I believed were really good friends. I told her a lot about what was going on in my life. And a couple weeks after we began talking, she told me that if I ever needed a place to live, that I could come and stay with her. Well, I took her completely seriously, so I decided to just up and leave in the middle of the night, one night, and take the Greyhound to California. I didn't have much money, but there was enough to get me to where I was going. However, after the nearly 4-day bus trip across the country, when I got to the station, she was nowhere to be seen. I tried calling her, and there was no answer. I thought that maybe she was just on her way to pick me up. But I waited, and I called, and I waited, and I called. I soon came to the realization that she was never going to come and get me. So, because I believed someone that I really didn't know, I ended up in a city that I knew nothing about, with no money, family, or friends. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call my parents. I know a lot of you probably thought that I could, but they would have told me that I made the mess, and I would have to find my way out of it. I spent as much time as I could in the bus station, but my time soon ran out when I was asked by a security guard to show my bus ticket. I didn't have one, so I was forced to leave the bus station and wander around LA on my own. I think most people would be surprised at the things you would do when you have no money and no way to get food or shelter. Your qualms about taking food out of the garbage go away very quickly, as do your cares about breaking into abandoned buildings in order to find a place to sleep. Yeah, I was naive and somewhat stupid for going to California in the first place. But I also found myself to be extremely more trusting of other people that I didn't know. After about a week of sleeping on the streets, trying to find some sort of runaway shelter, and failing, I was sleeping in an alley. Something woke me up. It moved my leg a little bit. I was barely aware of it, but then I felt it was definitely someone who was kicking me lightly in the side of the leg. When I woke up, there was a rather large man standing right next to me. Startled, I jumped up and was about to run away, and the man stopped me, told me he wasn't a cop and he wasn't going to hurt me or anything. He just told me that he noticed me sleeping in an alley and wondered if he could get me a bite to eat and give me a place to sleep for just one night. Well, I was eager for both, so I agreed. He took me to a fast food restaurant and let me order a ton of food. I scarfed it all down while he talked to me. I don't really know how much of it I actually heard. It just felt so good to be getting some hot food in me. He then loaded me up in his car and told me he'd find me a place to sleep for the night. I honestly thought this meant he would be taking me to a motel or something. He didn't, though. He took me to a house outside of the city. It looked abandoned or something. The lawn was uncared for. The place was not kept up at all. I recall one of the windows being boarded up as well. Still, I didn't think too much about it. I had slept in at least 2 abandoned buildings in the past week, so having another one was no big deal. The man opened the door, which wasn't unlocked, and he let me walk first into the building. It was dark, and he didn't move to turn on the light. He walked me over to a door and then opened it, telling me I could sleep in that room. I didn't know how to respond, really. I looked into the doorway and saw that it wasn't a room. It was, in fact, a staircase leading downward. For the first time, I paused, and when I did, the jerk grabbed me and shoved me down the stairs. I fell hard, all the way to the bottom. As I did, I heard him close and then lock the door. A few moments later, I heard his car start up, and he drove away. This was an odd situation. I was homeless, and even though I was locked in a room, I was not outside. However, I was also put in a place against my will. I explored the room, and really, there was nothing there. No food, no water, no bed, no blanket. It was just a completely empty basement. There was a window, but it was too high up on the wall for me to have any chance of reaching it. I decided to sleep, and just wait and see what the guy was planning on doing to me. He didn't come back right away. In fact, I fell asleep and was woken up in the morning by the sun shining through the window. He didn't come back that day. He didn't come back that night. He didn't come back the following day either, or the following night. And by the next day, I was really beginning to get scared. Yeah, I was hungry, but I was mostly worried about water. I knew I couldn't survive long without it. He was gonna let me die of dehydration, which I knew is an agonizing way to die. Another day passed, and I really felt like I would die at any moment. I had 3 full days without water. 3 full days without water. I was told before that you couldn't live like that. But I didn't die. However, I felt so sick and wonky that I was laying down and falling in and out of sleep for who knows how long. I woke up. Who knows when? Once I saw lights shining in the window. Fear gripped me, because I assumed it was that man coming back for me. He probably assumed that I had died and was coming to take my body away, or whatever it was that he did with people he did this to. I tried to get to my feet, hoping that I could trip him or something as he came through the door. However, I couldn't bring myself to my knees, much less my feet. I just lay there and listened as he unlocked the door, and then heard footsteps on the upper floor. I had all these thoughts in my head that once he noticed I wasn't dead, he would probably just kill me. I wanted to be ready for something, but I just didn't know what to do. I'm not sure how long I heard him walking around, but then the door finally opened, and the light shined through. I heard a woman's voice saying something, but I wasn't sure what it was, before I passed out again. I woke up next time in a hospital. My throat was so very dry. I had an IV in my arm. It turned out that the old house was for sale, and it was being showed. The agent, who was the one who opened the door, called the police and an ambulance when they saw me. I told the cops about the man, but there was no indication who he was. He wasn't the owner of the house, as far as they knew. He never came back. The police told me that they figured he was some sicko who wanted people to find dead bodies in their basement. I wasn't the first person they found in such a predicament. I was just lucky that I managed to live as long as I did. Since I was a minor, my parents were contacted, and they put me on a plane and brought me home. Interestingly enough, the problems we had seemed very minor once I got back home. Number 2. Stranded. I was one of those teenagers that hated just about everything that came from being a teenager. I hated living at home with my parents. I hated having to go to school. I hated trying to live under anyone's rules. When I was 16, I didn't drop out of high school. However, I did just quit going. It wasn't interesting to me anymore. When my parents got contacted about it, they told me that I had to go to school. We got into a huge fight, and they told me that if I didn't go to school, then I couldn't live there anymore. I know it was a bluff, but I really didn't care. I was fed up with living there anyway. So I contacted a few of my best friends, who also hated living at home. My friend Carl had a car, and we decided that we'd take what we had, load up the car, and just go out and live our lives away from our families. We started driving west. We figured we'd drive through some of the mountain states and then head to California. It seemed like the best place for a runaway from home to go to. We all had a little bit of money, and it was enough to keep us with gas and keep us fed for a little while. I was the first one to run out of money, though. I didn't really ration it nearly as well as I should have. When you spend a lot of time with people in a car, especially if you've never been with them so long before, it can get a little testy as well. I think the fact that I didn't have any money made everyone sort of peeved at me. While we were driving through the mountains in Colorado, we stopped to take a bathroom break. When I was done and zipping up, I heard the car start. As I tried to run back to the area, I saw the car pulling away without me. I yelled, demanding for them to come back. One of the guys flipped me the bird as they drove off. I really had no idea what to do, so I walked along the side of the road. We were way high up in the mountains, and the altitude had already been making me sick. A few cars went by me, and I tried hitching from them, but I guess most people don't want to pick up a lonely guy hitchhiking way up in the mountains. I had been hitching for several hours, and it was very dark. And of course, when it got dark, the temperature fell, and I began to fear for my life. Finally, after hours and hours had passed, a car finally picked me up. I eagerly jumped in the passenger seat. The man who picked me up seemed pretty normal at first. He was a bigger guy, really fit, and looked like he probably worked out a lot. He was driving a luxury car with seat warmers, so I figured he was decently well off. And he seemed really interested in helping me. It was after we had some normal small talk that he began asking me about myself. He asked why I was outside and hiking in the mountains. I told him that my friends had abandoned me when I ran out of money. He asked how old I was, and I told him I was 18. But I think he knew I was lying. I barely looked 16, and I knew it. He then got very interested in my story, and why I had left with my friends to begin with. I was so thankful to have him pick me up that I just kept answering his questions, without thinking that he could have a motive or not. I slipped up and told him that I had left home because my parents and I weren't getting along. I don't think that, at this time, I had really caught that he was fishing for information, or that I admitted I was a teenage runaway. Furthermore, I was a teenage runaway that no one knew where he was. The conversation then got darker. The guy began telling me a story about the last time he had picked up a hitchhiker. He made it seem like it was something that he had done often. He told me it was another underage kid, making me realize that he knew I was lying. I asked him "What happened with the kid?" And his response scared the crap out of me. He responded, "Only I'll ever know." I tried to keep my fear hidden. I had so recently been grateful that I had been given a ride, but I was beginning to grow terrified. I kept trying to steer the talk back to his other hitchhiker, but he kept avoiding it. He kept fishing around for information about me and my home life. I was shaking throughout the ride, convinced that I was going to be a story this guy would tell another hitchhiker one day. I, however, didn't make it seem like I was afraid of him in any way. I did ask him, though, if we could stop at a rest area or something, because I badly had to go to the bathroom. He seemed unwilling to stop, so I began holding myself and making my legs jump a little bit. He told me he'd stop at a gas station. It took about 15 minutes to get to the gas station, and when he stopped, I told him I'd be back, and ran out into the store. I immediately let the cashier know that I thought I was in trouble. I pointed to the car out by the pump. The guy saw me talking to the clerk, and at that point, he quickly pulled away from the pump and took off fast down the road. That, in my mind, just confirmed what I believed. I was done with my adventure. I asked the clerk if I could use the phone, and I did. I called my parents, who were worried about me, and they wired me the money to get home. It turns out that I was lucky, as my other friends, when they were out of money, held up a gas station, and they all got in a lot more trouble than I did. Number 3. Todd. Every now and then, you have to look back and wonder about the things in your life. It may have gone differently. If we knew the results that our actions would have, we'd be much better at choosing what actions we would take instead. But everyone makes mistakes, and everyone suffers consequences to those mistakes. I grew up in a fairly uncomfortable environment. My parents got divorced when I was really young. Us kids ended up being with our dad, not because he was a good parent, but because he was the only one with a job and a place to live. He was quite substandard as a parent, though. He got very lost in alcohol abuse, and bad at paying his bills. As a result, we ended up moving often when he neglected to pay rent for months. We had no stability at all. When I was 15 years old, I met a boy named Todd, who was in a similar situation to me. Only for him, it was his mother who had custody, and she was the bad parent. He lived with his brother, and the few times that I was over at his house, I saw firsthand what an awful woman she was. And we were both miserable. One day, when he was taking me for a ride in his Mustang, the song "Fast Car" by Tracy Chapman came on the radio. I guess we were both just so miserable in our lives that we decided to do it, just run away. We both gathered some belongings and some money, and we decided we were going to drive to Chicago. I guess I could bog you down with details. Hell, I could probably even write a novel about it if I wanted to. And the trip was all right, and we did make it to Chicago. However, we quickly learned that being able to find a job at ages 15 and 16 years old was a lot more difficult than it had seemed. Also, his car was bought and paid for completely, but being 16 years old, it wasn't in his name. It was a present from his father. So, it wasn't like his mother could report it stolen. The point being that we couldn't get money for the car in any way. We had a hotel room at a really ratty hotel in the city, and after a few days of us not being able to pay for the room, Todd felt he had to do something in order to get us money. So one day he went out, and he was out for a very long time. When he came back, he was visibly exhausted. I tried to get some information out of him, but he wouldn't tell me anything. He always changed the subject while we ate, and then watched television. This continued for about a week and a half. Todd would go out during the day, come back looking worn out, but he would have food and he would have a little bit of money. It was always just enough to keep us going. So one day, I told Todd that we had some money to last us a few days. He should take a day off from whatever he was doing. I'd go out and buy us some food. He was hard to convince, but I eventually convinced him to do it. He gave me some cash, and I went on my way. I was out of the motel room for about 3 hours. I had to find a grocery store, get there, get food, and come back. I felt really good about myself. I had done something for Todd, who had done the world for me at that point. I came into the motel room, and I dropped the groceries on the floor. Todd was laying on the bed, his throat cut completely open. His eyes stared blankly into nothingness, and there was blood all over the place. I ran down to the hotel office and got them to call the police. It was a nightmare. I mean, an absolute nightmare. I couldn't believe what had happened. Just a few hours beforehand, I had been feeling on top of the world, thinking that I could let my best friend rest, while I tried to do something nice for him. And in that short period of time, he was brutally murdered in the room I had slept with him in. I was sent back home to my dad. Todd's parents were called. There was an investigation, of course, but the case is cold, and has been. Todd left no trail as to what sort of job he was doing to get us money. The only person who knew him in the city was me, and I didn't know anything. Todd was a teenage runaway, whose death got lost in the annals of teenage runaways. I always assumed whatever he was doing for money, it must have been something illegal. And I wonder, if I stayed home that night, would he still be alive? Or would we both be dead? And how responsible was I for my friend being murdered? I don't have answers to any of these questions, but I've spent my life being an advocate for resources for teens who run away from home. I hope that maybe some teenagers hearing this story will decide against running away. I mean, your life might be miserable, but it can just be a whole lot worse. And if you do run away, go to a shelter. Don't do anything illegal. The world's a lot scarier than you think it is. I miss you, Todd. That is all I can say to you. That, plus, I'm sorry. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. Sorry for the heavy ending to this video. Those who have been with me for a while will likely know that teenage runaways are a very important issue for me. So much bad comes from running away from home, and I always hope that teenagers won't do it. When I released my first video on this topic, I was asked to do a follow-up, and I hope it could stand up to the original. I'd, of course, really like to know what everyone thought of it. There is a print version up in the Killer Orange Cat subreddit, if you want to read the stories. The link for that is included in the description, along with a link to my sister's Killer Orange Cat merchandise store. Feel free to take a look at them both. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave some comments to let me know what you thought of the video. and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. My main requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not been read on any other YouTube channel. And, whatever you do, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.